This is part one of the stereo flanger. Let's dive into the very fine details of this unit. So we have the block diagram here on the left, and then we have the flanger controls here in the unit itself, in the Kronos. So we'll use these two in tandem to kind of explore what's going on, along with our handy dandy scope here. So the delay time is probably the first thing to talk about. This delay time is this block right here. They call it flanger. A flanger is a delay. So just think of this block as the amount of time the signal is delayed by. So it can be delayed by anything between 0 and 50 milliseconds. All that this means is that the signal isn't going to reach the output until 50 milliseconds have elapsed. So it's almost similar to the note on control in the regular basic program basic section. There is a main difference though. The note on control, if I were to lift my finger before whatever time has elapsed, before in this case 50 milliseconds has elapsed, then this won't do anything. Whereas the effect, of course, will delay whatever I send into it. It's not a note on control, it is a delay control. I just want to show you that they are just wanted to say that they're similar in that regard, that whatever is being input is just taking its time to reach the output. So let's see what that looks like. Here we have a wet sound. I think I have a sawtooth. Let's look at that on the oscilloscope here. Let's go to pitch. There we are. And I do not want to hear noise. I want to hear saw. Nice. So that's what that looks like. And that is being delayed by 50 milliseconds. And it's technically not going to look any different if I delay it by 0 milliseconds. But if I slide this control, it almost looks like I'm adjusting the phase. And in fact, that really is what I'm doing. A sound that's being delayed by an amount of time is the same as phase shifting it. This is common knowledge. I wish I could explain it better than that, but I guess we can go with more visuals. Let's say that we are on 50-50 dry wet. So now we are summing the delayed signal here with the original signal that's just going straight to the output, the undelayed signal. Technically, with a delay time of 0 milliseconds, this is reaching the output as fast as it's going into the input. There's no difference between in time, or at starting time, I should say, between the original and the affected signal. So that's just going to manifest as like an increase in volume. So if I have the effect bypassed and then I play, and then I enable it, we see it increase in volume. Since we're taking a copy of the signal and summing it with itself immediately. Now, if I add some delay time while it's playing, I'm summing this sawtooth with a delayed, effectively phase-shifted version of itself. And in fact, let's bypass the effect. That makes me think of the double saw. If I turn up wavemorph, I have two sawtooth waveforms, and I can adjust the phase of them with this, of one of them with the phase control, which looks like that. Very, very similar. Let's go back to a regular sawtooth. Turn this on. Again, there's differences, but I'm just kind of highlighting other similar parts of the Kronos. Let's move on to feedback. So that's this part of the block diagram right here. And what this is it's effectively like a volume control. At 100, it's making a copy of itself at the same volume and sending it back into the delay. In other words, it's going to be delayed again by whatever the delay time is. So let's explore this by looking at a burst of noise. Let me go into my amp envelope. I will take sustain all the way down, and I'll leave the decay at 20. This is going to be about 44 milliseconds. Of course, I need to turn up my noise in order for us to get a 44 millisecond noise burst. And we have a 50 millisecond delay time. Let's look at that in the analyzer. I switched the analyzer so we're looking at a greater period of time. We're not really looking at single cycles anymore. We're looking at blocks of 50 milliseconds. So we have a 44-second noise burst. That's going to be, actually I only really want to hear the wet. So we have a noise burst that's lasting 44 milliseconds. That's being delayed by 50 milliseconds. But then that 50 millisecond delay block is going back into itself to get delayed again and played back 50 milliseconds later, so on and so forth, repeated ad infinitum. So let's see what that looks like through our analyzer. And let's freeze it, and I'll take down my feedback. There we go. So I'm going to see if I can align the freeze a little bit better with our little markers here, so we can see. Let's try it again. That's pretty close. Okay. So you can see that we have a 44 millisecond noise burst, but then we have 6 milliseconds technically of silence that's being repeated over and over again. And you can see that they are the size. See, this is 50, 100. You can see that that is the size of this block, so on and so forth. And so that's what feedback is doing. It's sending the same thing back into itself, the same volume. It's never lowering in volume. But if we do lower the volume, that means that these repeats will get lowered in volume every time it goes back through that delay. So let's see what that looks like. So with it at 50, you can see we only have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, maybe 8 delays. If I turn it down lower than that, I only have like 3. But if I turn it much higher, you can see that I have many more delays that are getting lowered in volume more slowly. Again, we're not, you can almost think of this as like a percentage. We're basically turning it down by like 20% each time. I don't think that's necessarily exact. I can't tell you if this is necessarily 20% lower than that, 20% lower than that, so on and so forth, but I definitely know that there's attenuation going on that we can easily see. So that's what feedback is doing. Now, feedback has another trick up its sleeve, and that's negative feedback. And so what negative feedback is doing is it's doing a polarity flip every time it's going through the feedback path. So in order for us to see that, let's use a single cycle. Let's use a sawtooth because that'll make it easier to see. And let's change our burst to only last 1 cycle of a C3 sawtooth. That's going to be a value of 5. And now let's have our delay time last for 2 cycles. So just like we had a 44 millisecond noise burst, but a 50 millisecond delay time, which, you know, had 6 milliseconds of silence, what I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to have a single cycle sawtooth followed by effectively a cycle of silence. Hopefully that makes sense. Let's see, would that be, let me think about this for a second. Yeah, 7.6 milliseconds. So let's go to full feedback and let's see what it looks like on pitch. And let's hit play. And so it's really easy to see that this would be technically the saw up version, and then followed by a cycle of silence, and then that's going to be from here to here is 7.6 milliseconds. Then it's going back through the feedback where it's going to be polarity flipped, and then when we went up here, we're now going down here, followed by our full cycle, or our half cycle of silence, I guess you could say. And that's what that looks like. So it's flip-flopping. It's going down, it's going up. Every other time that it goes through the feedback, it's getting its pole flipped. So the last parameter to go over is going to be high dampening, and this is probably the easiest to understand. Let's use noise again for this, and I will also put this back to 44 milliseconds of noise. I could have actually set these up to tone adjust parameters, and then I could have just done it with a click of a button, but that's okay. So let's go back to the effect, and let's look at this through a spectrum analyzer. So this is a low-pass filter that's in the feedback path. If you are not using any feedback, if you have this at 0, this high dampening parameter isn't going to do anything, because if there's nothing being fed back, then there's nothing for the low-pass filter to affect. So we have it at full feedback. Let's do our noise burst. We see this burst of noise that's going to be repeated. So it's not going to look as chaotic as noise. We've effectively have frozen noise here. And now as we move this high dampener percentage up, it's going to be moving this low-pass filter down. And so I've moved the cutoff to about here, which means that everything above the cutoff point is going to be attenuated every single time that it gets looped through the feedback. Now let's see, the cutoff point looks to be about here. Now higher harmonics, or overtones, partials I should say, are going to be attenuated faster, because think about it, a low-pass filter at the cutoff point is only at minus 3 dB, but 2 octaves higher it's at like minus 24 dB, depending on the amount of pulls. But then below the cutoff point, everything is going to be unaffected. But yeah, things that are further, that are higher, that are further up the spectrum than the cutoff point are going to be attenuated faster. Things that are below the cutoff point aren't going to be attenuated at all. So until I turn up the high dampening percentage, or in other words, turn down the low pass filter as I increase this parameter, we'll be then attenuating lower and lower harmonics. I could completely close the low pass filter and then I just attenuate everything right away. So that's all I want to go over for this video. In the next video, I'll get into more particularities, but I just want to try to keep these short. So thank you.